Picture this. It's April 30th, 1871, and somewhere in the Arizona Territory, a clock is ticking toward one of those moments that changes everything. The kind of moment where history pivots on a knife's edge, where decisions made in anger create ripples that will spread across decades. In the pre-dawn darkness, while most of the world sleeps, a mob is gathering. Not the usual suspects you might imagine. This isn't some Hollywood western with mustache-twirling villains. No, this mob includes Tucson citizens, Mexicans, and Papago Indians. Think about that for a moment. Three groups that normally eye each other with suspicion have found common cause. What could possibly unite such unlikely allies? The answer lies in a sleeping Apache camp at Camp Grant, where over 100 people, mostly women and children, are about to become victims of something that will ignite the Southwest like a powder keg. Within minutes, their blood will soak into the desert sand, and the Arizona Territory will transform into a battlefield where the old rules of warfare simply don't apply anymore. Now, here's where our story gets really interesting. Into this chaos rides a man who looks nothing like what you'd expect from a frontier general. George Crook prefers riding a mule to a horse. Imagine that for a second. A United States Army general bouncing along on a mule instead of a magnificent cavalry mount. He wears canvas suits instead of crisp military uniforms, and sports a beard that makes him look more like a mountain man than an officer. The Apache have a name for this strange, unconventional leader, Nantan Lupan, Grey Wolf. And let me tell you, that nickname isn't about his appearance. It's about his cunning, his patience, his ability to think like his enemy. Because while his predecessors have been chasing Apache raiders through canyon labyrinths until their cavalry horses collapse from exhaustion, Crook is doing something radical. He's watching, he's listening, he's learning. And what he's learning should terrify anyone trying to fight the Apache on their home ground. You see, the traditional Apache way of life isn't some primitive existence that white settlers imagine. It's a sophisticated system built around seasonal movements between sacred mountains and hidden springs. Every red rock formation has a name that carries meaning passed down through generations. Every canyon tells a story that connects the living to their ancestors. This isn't just terrain to the Apache, MMR. It's a living library written in stone and sky. Raiding, what Americans call theft and terrorism, is woven into Apache culture like threads in a blanket. Young men don't prove themselves by sitting around campfires telling stories. They prove themselves by stealing horses from Mexican ranches and American settlements, then redistributing that wealth according to complex kinship obligations that would make a sociology professor's head spin. It's economics, religion, and coming-of-age ritual all rolled into one. But here's the collision point that's about to tear the Southwest apart. American settlers are flooding into Arizona Territory for gold and grazing land. To them, Apache raids aren't cultural practices, they're savage terrorism that must be crushed completely. Two worldviews, two ways of life, slamming into each other with the force of continental plates. Crook studies his enemy with the patience of a scientist examining specimens. While other officers rage about savage depredations, he's discovering something crucial that everyone else has missed. Apache isn't one people, it's many autonomous bands. Chiricahua, White Mountain, Tonto, Coyotero. Each has their own territories, their own alliances, their own internal politics. Some bands are raiding, while others are seeking peace. Some flee to Mexican mountains, while others camp near army posts begging for protection. Think about what this means from a military perspective. You're not fighting one unified enemy with clear command structure. You're fighting dozens of independent groups that might be allies one day and enemies the next. Some Apache bands are literally fighting other Apache bands while also fighting Americans. It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. This fragmentation, Crook realizes, is both the Apache's greatest strength and their potential weakness. Their strength because no single defeat can end their resistance, OPI key. Cut off one head and 5 more keep fighting. Their weakness because, well, that's where our general starts forming an idea so radical, so controversial, that it will either mark him as a genius or brand him as a traitor. As 1871 draws to a close, with more failed campaigns, more mounting casualties, more territory turned into a wasteland of mutual slaughter. Crook is conceiving a strategy that will shock his fellow officers and enrage territorial politicians. He's looking at this fragmented Apache society and seeing opportunity where others see only chaos. He's beginning to understand that sometimes, to defeat your enemy, you don't destroy them. You turn them into something else entirely. You offer them a choice that's not really a choice at all, but feels like one. You present them with a path that preserves their honor while serving your purposes. But here's the question that will haunt everyone involved. When warriors are asked to hunt warriors, when brothers are turned against brothers, when ancient loyalties are tested against survival itself, what happens to the soul of a people? What price do you pay when you're asked to choose between your culture and your life? Because what Crook is about to propose will force that impossible choice on hundreds of Apache warriors, and the consequences of their decisions will echo through the mountains and deserts of the Southwest for generations to come. The Apache Wars are about to take a turn that no one, not the settlers, not the politicians, not even the Apache themselves, could have predicted. The grey wolf is about to bare his teeth, and the hunt is about to begin. Picture General Crook in early 1872, walking into a room full of his fellow officers with a proposal that will make them question his sanity. He's about to suggest something so outrageous, so contrary to every principle of frontier warfare, that you can almost hear the collective gasp echoing through military headquarters. "Gentlemen," Crook might have said, "I propose we recruit Apache scouts to hunt their own people." The silence that follows is the kind you get when someone announces they're going to solve world hunger by farming on the moon. Then the explosion begins. General Sherman, the same man who marched through Georgia like an avenging angel, calls it madness to arm savages. Think about that. This is coming from a general who pioneered total war, who understood that sometimes you have to break everything to fix anything. Even he thinks Crook has lost his mind. The Tucson newspapers go absolutely ballistic. They brand Crook a fool who would give matches to arsonists. Editorial writers, safe in their offices hundreds of miles from Apache country, paint vivid pictures of treacherous Indians turning army weapons against their own commanders. Politicians in Washington start whispering about relieving this maverick general before he gets everyone killed. But here's what none of them understand, what Crook has figured out through months of careful observation. Apache society, with all its band autonomy and warrior traditions, contains the seeds of its own transformation. The grey wolf has calculated something that escaped everyone else. He's not asking Apaches to betray their people. He's offering them a way to remain warriors in a world where their traditional path to glory is disappearing. The first recruits don't come from hostile bands still raiding the countryside. They come from white, mountain bands already living peacefully near Fort Apache. Men who've watched the writing appear on the wall in letters of blood and gunpowder. These aren't desperate men grasping at survival, Tensa says. They're pragmatists who understand that the old world is ending whether they participate in its transformation or not. Crook offers them something profound, $13 monthly, and in a world where reservation rations are thin and opportunities scarce, that's good money. But more importantly, he offers them something money can't buy: status and purpose. A way to be warriors without becoming outlaws. Young men like Alcacay, whose traditional raiding opportunities have vanished like morning mist, suddenly see a path to honor that doesn't require fighting an unwinnable war against the American juggernaut. But imagine the first joint operations between soldiers and Apache scouts. Picture nervous cavalrymen fingering their weapons as men they've been taught to see as devils lead them through country where previous patrols vanished without leaving so much as a horseshoe behind. The Apache scouts, wearing red headbands to distinguish friend from foe, endure constant suspicious glances and whispered conversations that stop when they approach. The tension is thick enough to cut with a cavalry saber. Soldiers wonder if they're being led into ambush. Scouts wonder if they'll be shot in the back by the very men they're trying to help. It's a partnership built on mutual necessity rather than trust, and it nearly collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Then comes the Tonto Basin campaign, and everything changes in the span of a dawn attack. Scout Nantage leads soldiers to a hostile rancheria hidden in caves that no white man could possibly find. We're talking about terrain so rugged, so maze-like, that cavalry horses can't even reach it. The Apache have chosen this place precisely because it's inaccessible to conventional military operations. But Nantaje knows every deer trail, every hidden water source, every secret approach that generations of his people have used. The dawn attack succeeds completely. Not because of superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but because the scouts eliminate the Apache's greatest advantage, their intimate knowledge of the land. When women and children are captured instead of warriors escaping into the rocks, when families face separation and exile instead of glorious death, the psychological mathematics change completely. Word spreads through Apache country like wildfire carried on desert wind. The impossible has happened. Crook's scouts know every secret waterhole, every hidden trail, every sanctuary that hostile bands thought was invisible to white eyes. The psychological impact proves more devastating than any military defeat. Hostile bands can no longer disappear into their mountain sanctuaries with confidence. Worse, and this is the truly terrifying part, they cannot tell which Apaches approaching their camp serve the army until it's too late. The scout system creates a new and nightmarish reality where Apache knowledge is turned against Apache freedom, where the very skills that made them unconquerable become the instruments of their defeat. The most powerful moments come when scouts negotiate surrenders using kinship connections that run deeper than politics or war. Sergeant Chicken, INC, and yes, despite his unfortunately inglorious name, this man becomes a key figure, convinces his brother-in-law's entire band to come in peacefully, not through threats or bribes, but through family bonds that transcend the artificial categories of hostile and friendly. These scouts speak truths that white officers cannot, that the old life is ending, but that Crook keeps his promises, that there's a difference between surrender and annihilation, that choosing the scout trail might preserve some fragment of Apache identity in a world determined to erase it completely. By 1873, over 200 Apache scouts serve the army. Think about that number for a moment. 200 men who've made an impossible choice, who've decided that survival requires collaboration with the force destroying their people. They create an intelligence network that penetrates every corner of Apache territory, a web of knowledge and kinship that makes traditional resistance impossible. Yet each success deepens the fundamental tragedy at the heart of this story. These men save lives, Apache lives, and American lives, by helping destroy their own people's independence. They preserve their families by betraying their culture. They remain warriors by hunting warriors. It's a devil's bargain that makes perfect sense and no sense at all. And the worst part? It works exactly as Crook predicted it would. The Apache scout system becomes the most effective counterinsurgency tool in American military history, a template that will be copied from the Philippines to Afghanistan. But standing in those Arizona mountains, watching Apache scouts lead soldiers toward their next target, you have to wonder, what does it do to a man's soul when he uses everything his ancestors taught him to help end the world that created him? By 1882, most Apache leaders have either surrendered, died, or been captured. But one man remains free, and his very name will become synonymous with desperate, defiant resistance. The scouts call him Goyacla, the one who yawns, but history knows him by his Spanish name, Geronimo. Now, don't picture some Hollywood savage. Geronimo is a medicine man, a spiritual leader whose power comes not from physical prowess, but from his claimed ability to see beyond the visible world. He tells his followers he can predict the future, that he can make himself invisible to enemies, that bullets will pass through him like he's made of smoke. Whether you believe in such things or not is irrelevant. What matters is that his followers believe, and that belief makes them willing to follow him into impossible situations. And here's what should give you chills. Geronimo consistently evades scout-led patrols that capture every other Apache leader. Either he really does possess supernatural powers, or he's developed counterintelligence capabilities that would impress a modern spy master. The intelligence war between Geronimo and the scout system becomes a deadly chess match, played across hundreds of square miles of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. Apache scouts spread carefully crafted disinformation about army movements, but Geronimo has his own network of informants. He plants false trails that lead pursuit parties in circles, doubles back through terrain that would kill most men, and uses the scout system's own efficiency against itself. Think about the psychological warfare involved. Geronimo knows that the scouts' greatest weapon is their knowledge of Apache thinking. So he starts thinking differently. Instead of moving predictably between traditional camps and water sources, he creates new patterns that even Apache minds can't anticipate. He becomes a ghost in his own homeland, more Apache than the Apaches who hunt him. But the Shadow War turns genuinely sinister when Geronimo begins assassinating scouts who venture too close to his camps. He doesn't just kill them, he leaves their bodies marked with owl feathers, one of the most powerful death curses in Apache culture. This isn't just elimination of enemies, it's spiritual warfare designed to terrorize the survivors. Picture Scout Tsoe finding his own cousin's body marked with those terrible feathers. According to Apache law, he's obligated to seek vengeance for family blood. But according to his army oath, he's supposed to maintain discipline and follow orders. It's an impossible situation that tears at the very foundations of his identity. Does he honor the old ways that demand blood for blood, or the new ways that promise survival through service? These aren't abstract moral dilemmas. These are life and death choices that men are forced to make in the space between heartbeats, with the desert wind carrying the scent of decomposition and the weight of ancestral judgment pressing down like a physical force. The game reaches its climax in the Sierra Madre campaigns of 1883. Now we're talking about operations in Mexico, where Apache bands have traditionally fled when pressure becomes too intense. It's mountain country so remote that Mexican authorities have never effectively controlled it, so rugged that even Apache bands consider it a hardship posting. Leading the penetration is Scout Al-Seba, a legendary white man who's somehow managed to get himself adopted into Apache culture. Think about what that means. A German immigrant who understands Apache ways better than most Apaches, who speaks the language fluently, who's earned respect in a society that doesn't give respect lightly. Alongside him rides Mickey Free, whose story reads like something from a fever dream. Mickey Free is half Irish, raised Apache after being kidnapped as a child. His capture decades earlier was one of the sparks that ignited these very wars. Now he's leading army scouts against the people who raised him, hunting the men who taught him everything he knows about survival and warfare. If you're looking for a symbol of how twisted and tragic this conflict has become, Mickey Free is your man. These scouts penetrate Geronimo's Mexican sanctuary, locating camps in canyon mazes where no regular soldier could survive a single night. They move through country where water sources are days apart, where one wrong turn means death from thirst or exposure, where the margin for error is measured in yards rather than miles. In a moment of supreme irony, Geronimo actually surrenders briefly when these scouts convince him that resistance has become futile. Not white officers, with their threats and ultimatums, but Apache voices carrying truths that transcend military power. The scouts tell him what he already knows but hasn't wanted to accept, that the old world is gone, that his followers are dying for a dream that can never be rebuilt. But Geronimo's surrender proves temporary. In 1885, he breaks out again with 35 followers. Think about that number. 35 people. Men, women, children. That's not an army, that's an extended family. Yet this tiny group triggers the final campaign that will see 5,000 soldiers deployed, 1/4 of the entire United States Army, to catch 36 desperate Apaches. General Nelson Miles replaces Crook, bringing conventional military thinking back to unconventional warfare. Miles believes in overwhelming force, in technology, in the superiority of civilized methods over savage cunning. He deploys heliograph stations that can flash messages across hundreds of miles, creates supply depots that can sustain prolonged operations, brings railroad cars full of equipment and ammunition, and for months, Geronimo makes him look like a fool. 35 Apaches, operating on foot with whatever they can carry, consistently outmaneuver 5,000 soldiers with all the resources of the United States military behind them. They strike at isolated ranches, vanish before reinforcements arrive, cross and recross the border so frequently that diplomatic protests fly between Washington and Mexico City. Only when Miles reluctantly employs Crook's scout system does the net finally begin to close. It's a bitter admission that conventional military power, no matter how overwhelming, cannot function in this vertical wilderness without Apache knowledge guiding it. The end comes in September 1886, when Scouts Martin and Cayeta risk death as traitors by entering Geronimo's camp under a white flag. These men know they might not leave alive. Apache justice for suspected betrayal is swift and final. But they also know that the alternative is watching their people die one by one in a war that can have only one conclusion. The final surrender negotiation becomes a masterpiece of Apache diplomacy. Martin and Cayeta don't threaten or plead. They simply present reality, that Geronimo's war, however heroic, is killing the very people it's supposed to protect. That continuing to fight means watching children die of starvation and exposure while their parents pursue impossible dreams of military victory. When Geronimo finally walks into Miles's camp that September morning, he's not just surrendering 35 followers. He's ending a way of life that stretches back countless generations, closing a chapter of human history that can never be reopened. But here's the truly bitter irony that awaits. Even the loyal scouts who made this victory possible are about to discover that in the eyes of American bureaucracy, there's no meaningful distinction between good Indians and bad Indians. The same prison trains that carry Geronimo into exile will carry Cayeta, still wearing the medal he earned for bravery in service to the United States Army. At Fort Marion, Florida, Scout and hostile will suffer together in humid captivity, their desert-adapted bodies weakening in alien wetlands, the careful distinctions that seemed so important during the wars dissolving in the democratic misery of defeat. The Apache Wars are ending, but the true tragedy is just beginning. The Apache Wars end not with thunder, but with silence. The kind of silence that settles over mountains when the last echo of gunfire fades, when the last war cry dies on the desert wind. By 1890, the Scout system has achieved its purpose so completely, so thoroughly, that it has eliminated its own necessity. The hunters have run out of prey, but here's what the history books don't tell you. Ending a war is not the same as ending a story. The Scouts who made victory possible now face a question that has no good answer. Who are you when the thing that defined you no longer exists? These men are caught between worlds in ways that defy easy categorization. They're not traditional Apache warriors, those are dead or in exile. But they're not fully accepted Americans either, despite their service records and military decorations. They're something new, something unprecedented. Apache men who used their ancestors' knowledge to help end their ancestors' world. Some scouts, like Apache, use their veteran status as a strategic weapon. Picture this. He's wearing his Medal of Honor, the highest decoration the United States military can bestow, when reservation Indian agents try to ban traditional Apache ceremonies. When officials start lecturing about civilizing the savage, Apache quietly reminds them of his service record, his sacrifices for American victory. It's hard to call a Medal of Honor recipient a savage to his face. Apache becomes a master of what we might call cultural guerrilla warfare. He protects traditional ceremonies by reframing them as veterans' gatherings. He preserves Apache stories by calling them historical accounts of military operations. He maintains kinship networks by organizing scout reunions. In a world designed to erase Apache identity, he uses his military credentials to create small spaces where that identity can survive. Other scouts become teachers in a hidden curriculum of survival. Officially, they're teaching their sons ranching and farming, acceptable occupations for civilized Indians. Unofficially, they're passing down tracking skills, hunting knowledge, the ability to read weather signs and navigate by stars. They're preserving Apache wisdom by disguising it as practical education for reservation life. Think about what this means. Fathers teaching sons to follow deer trails while claiming they're learning to track cattle. Grandfathers showing grandsons how to find water in the desert while pretending it's about well digging. Ancient knowledge flowing through the narrow channels allowed by government policy, survival skills masquerading as vocational training. But not every scout successfully navigates this impossible transition. The story of the Apache kid embodies the tragic contradictions that many faced. Once he was Sergeant Al-Seba's most trusted scout, a man who could track through country that would confuse other Apaches. His military record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned. Then came a disputed incident. Accounts vary about exactly what happened, but the result was clear. The Apache kid fled to the mountains, becoming the very type of renegade he had once hunted. For years afterward, he haunted the borderlands like a living ghost, neither Apache nor American, hunted by both sides and trusted by neither. Picture the Apache kid moving through landscapes he had once patrolled as a scout, now seeing them from the other side of the hunt. Every waterhole he approaches might conceal an ambush. Every settlement he passes might harbor informants. He knows exactly how the pursuit operates because he helped create the system that's now tracking him. His story spreads through scout families like a warning about the price of standing between worlds. Mothers tell it to sons who talk about following the warrior path. Fathers share it with boys who dream of glory. It becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when the bridge you've built between cultures collapses with you standing on it. In 1924, something remarkable happens. Surviving Apache scouts gather for what they know will be their final reunion at Fort Huachuca. These are ancient men now, their faces carved by decades of desert sun and impossible choices. Their hands, once steady enough to track a single Apache through hundreds of miles of stone maze, now shake as they share food and memories. They speak in Apache, while their grandchildren play nearby in English. Think about that image. Old warriors discussing battles fought 40 years earlier while children who will never know the world, those battles destroyed, laugh and run in a language their grandfathers learned as enemies. The conversations are complex, layered with meanings that outside observers could never fully understand. They speak of Crook with emotions that resist simple categorization. TC. Respect mixed with resentment, gratitude tinged with regret. The Grey Wolf was the white chief who understood Apache ways well enough to use them for conquest, the enemy who offered survival at the price of identity. They name comrades who chose different paths, some dying as hostiles in the final campaigns, others living as honored veterans on reservations. They remember men like Nantage, who guided soldiers to hidden camps, and Geronimo, who died in Oklahoma still dreaming of mountains. The gathering becomes a ceremony of remembrance for a world destroyed partly by their own hands. Listen to them carefully, and you hear something unexpected. No apologies. These men made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, and they've carried the weight of those choices for decades. They know what the price was. They know who paid it. But they also know that the alternative was extinction, not just for themselves, but for their families, their children, their culture's chance of survival in any form. Today, if you visit Apache reservations, you'll discover something that should tell us everything about the complexity of this story. Descendants of Apache scouts serve in the American military at rates higher than any other ethnic group, not lower, higher. The warrior tradition didn't die with the Apache Wars. It transformed. At White Mountain Apache ceremonies, families still know which ancestors rode with Crook and which fought against him. The story lives in oral tradition, told differently depending on the teller, but always acknowledging the terrible choice that faced the warriors when they were asked to hunt warriors. Children grow up hearing about great-grandfathers who earned Congressional Medals of Honor and great-great-uncles who died fighting at Geronimo's side. The distinction between scout and hostile that seemed so crucial during the wars has blurred into something more complex, a recognition that different people found different ways to remain Apache when being Apache became impossible. General Crook's treacherous idea succeeded precisely because it wasn't treacherous at all. It was something far more subtle and perhaps more devastating. It offered Apache men a devil's bargain that made brutal sense in a collapsing world. It gave them a way to remain warriors while helping to end the world that had created warriors like them. The Apache Scout system became a template that the American military would use from the Philippines to Afghanistan, IR, the model for turning local knowledge against local resistance. But standing in those Arizona mountains today, looking at landscapes where the drama played out, you have to wonder if anyone truly won. The mountains remain, indifferent to human conflicts. The desert wind still carries voices if you know how to listen. And somewhere in the silence that settled over Apache country when the last war cry faded, the ghosts of the warrior trail continue their eternal patrol. Neither fully at peace nor entirely forgotten, the Apache wars are over. The questions they raised about identity, survival, and the price of adaptation echo still.